Uh,
Oh,
he can kind of,
oh,
he can kind
what a
of.
lovely voice she has.
I know. It's very ominous. Recording in progress. You better be good at this point.
Turning back now.
Right, stepping on your work, isn't it? Like, geez. So we got a few people here. This is great. We're gonna go ahead and get started because we're on a tight schedule today.
Sure.
This is Mr. DC Douglas, voice actor extraordinaire. If you want to give some background, and I'm gonna shut up now and let you do.
Oh, I have to talk. I am DC Douglas, and now I'm staring at a black box. Like you said, it's a TED Talk. Okay. I'm DC Douglas, and you probably know me. You might know me from doing the voice of Albert Wesker in Resident Evil for the last. Oh gosh, it's been about 11 years, 12 years. Started in 2007 with Umbrella Chronicles going forward. That's the because I know we're doing a horror thing here, so that's horror-wise. That's probably what you might know me from. As far as video games, Mass Effect, I was Legion in that. And for you anime fans, which like almost all anime has some aspect of horror to it, but the big one would be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I played Kira, Yoshikage Kira, and then I'm also a non-camera actor, and that's actually I started as a non-camera actor, and I do the voiceover as a way of paying the bills, but I still do on camera. In fact, I have a film coming out, which is right up your alley. It's called Aquarium of the Dead. Yes, zombie fish in tanks. I had a blast doing that. So that comes out on May 21st, I think, on VOD. And then you might also, let's see, Isle of the Dead was a film I did on Sci-Fi. It was on Z Nation, a zombie thing. I did 3 episodes on that show, and there's a lot of horror on my resume in the background there. But the main things are Resident Evil, I would say, and then the movie Aquarium of the Dead coming out on May 21st. So there you go. Hello. Am I supposed to look at a whole grid? I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, there is a whole grid. Look at that. So am I supposed to keep talking about it? Because I can talk about myself all day long.
Yes, talk about yourself all day long. Really, yeah. I mean, just kind of talk to us about, I think, getting into acting. I think you hit on a good point there in the opening here. Is like it pays the bills, and so I think coming from a career standpoint to some regards, and we actually have our career specialist for our program sitting in on the Saturday E. I think talking about doing certain things to pay the bills and then doing things for the art would be. I think
okay. You want to hear the ugly truth?
Yeah, and then kind of the the how did you get here and all that good stuff would be fun for folks to hear.
Well, now I will do my best to watch my language, just so you guys know I have a problem with that. I'm used to doing anime cons and whatnot, and usually all my panels are always marked 18 and over because I just don't know how to control my mouth. So, but I'll do my best here because you're a school. Let's see here. So I'm 55 and I moved to Los Angeles in 1985 when I was 19. Always wanted to be an actor since I was 7 years old. And first I was going to, when you're young, you have kids, by the way, these days are much more sophisticated than during my time. I'm sure that it's every consecutive generation is the same thing. You just become more sophisticated. But in my generation, what I thought was going to happen was that I was going to go to England, study at RADA. Then I was going to go to New York and I was going to become a Broadway star. Then they were going to pluck me out of Broadway, put me in a TV series. I'd become famous on a TV series. Then I'd become a movie star. And then that would be my life. And at nighttime, I'd DJ. Don't ask me why. That was like part of the thing. And then it turns out that, so I went and I auditioned for RADA. I was 6, I took the GED, got out of high school early. And I went, RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, held auditions in New York. And I think they did one in Canada. And that was it for this side of the country back then. So my mom scraped together some money and she goes, here's your first trip on your own. Good luck in New York. So I went to New York and auditioned for RADA. I'm sure I was horrible, very probably technical and nothing organic in my work at all. But then of course their audition was very technical too, the way they audition for actors. It's a long story. I won't go into that one. I'll just keep moving along. So that was my New York story. I didn't get in, obviously. So then I'm like, well, I'm going to lower my expectations. Again, this is all before the internet. So, during the internet, like nowadays, you could go, I didn't get into RADA, but now I'm going to go online and I'm look at other ways that I could potentially study in England, because that looks great in a resume. It always impresses people in America because we're stupid. But it wasn't the internet, it was the yellow pages. It was really difficult. So the only thing I knew of was RADA. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll just go to New York and I'll go to Juilliard. And of course, once you look at Juilliard, you get the prospectus in the mail. It takes 3 weeks to get the thing, and then you finally get it and you go, and you have to have a GPA of 3.8, I think it was. And I'm like, oh, well, my freshman year was a 2.3. So that wasn't going to work out. And then I'm like, well, I'll just go directly to Los Angeles. And especially when I started looking at the cost of living, because in the Juilliard prospectus back then, maybe they still do this, they listed out what it would cost to live in New York. And I, at that point, I had a job. I was living in the Northern California and near San Francisco. So I knew what it was to survive on your own. But the New York costs then were insane compared to what it was to live in San Francisco. So I was like, I'm going to LA. And I got sidetracked for a year, as an 18-year-old will do. And then finally got my poop together, my fecal matter was solidified. And I came down to Los Angeles and I auditioned for, I think, 7 different acting schools. The only one then that was accredited so I could get financial aid was Stella Harmon Actors Workshop. And she had been head of talent. She started the theater department at UCLA and then became head of talent at Universal Studios in the 50s. And then she started her own workshop in the late 60s. And so then she was smart and had connected with the government to get accrediting. And so that's where I decided to study. And the great thing about her school was that it taught an actor to be their own director, because unless you happen to literally out of the gate become a huge star, unless you're that, you're not going to get the time of the day with the director. The director is just casting what he needs, and then you show up on set and you be that thing. And if you're sort of like, oh, I think I'm good, I'm not good, you got to figure that out yourself, because they're usually not going to tell you. They're just going to go, if they get what they need, they're going to go, moving on. And then because you were the day player, they don't even look at you. I mean, that's a generalization, but that's how it is. So that's so I appreciated her for that. We did, some Meisner method, but the method essentially, as explained, is Stanislavski essentially went to all the actors of the time and said, how do you do what you do? And then he just compiled it. That's all. So you literally can figure out your own way of doing things. There's I can't remember his name now, famous actor stage actor in the 50s, and they said, how do you do your amazing performances? And he's like, it's like asking how I make good bread. He's like, I put on the apron, I go in the kitchen, I make good bread. So it's you eventually find your own way of doing things. These method, Meisner, all these things are just like jumping off points. I'm getting a little sidetracked here. Sorry about that. So so I went there for 4.5 years, enough to incur student debt that would last me 10 years. Which is nothing compared to what you people incur these days. No offense to the school, by the way. This is just general education thing. But trying to remember the story. When I first was auditioning for all those schools, one of the places, because again, I got set of the yellow pages. This is all we had then. One of the performing arts schools had a dance thing, and then there was voiceover. Now, I didn't know what voiceover was. It just said voiceover performance. And I'm like, oh, well, this is... So I went there, and I had, for the schools, then you had to audition with 2 monologues, a contemporary and a classic. And so I went in with my 2 auditions and my 2 monologues, and I go into her little office and I'm like, where's the stage? She's a lovely lady. And I said, I brought my monologues, and she went, oh, it's a very weird thing to do for a voiceover person. Then I went in, I did my first monologue, and she went, that was lovely. I'm a voiceover teacher, right? And of course, I had no idea what voiceover was. She explained it to me, said that I had a beautiful voice and that I should consider it as a career as well. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. I want to be on TV. I want to be on camera. And so I thanked her and I left. I finally got into that school. And then I had 6 months before I had to start studying, before my semester would begin. So I thought, well, I'll go back to her and I'll explore this thing. She was really inexpensive as well, and I could afford to pay because I finally had a job. And I went there, and for 6 months I studied voiceover, and I learned the basics of mic technique and word color. We sort of dabbled in accents. I've never been great at accents. I can learn them for an audition and then I forget them. But British, I always have British. Anyway, she was a super helpful person at the beginning of my career, and the voiceover helped me in that it moved me that much farther along technically, so that when I got into acting school, I was that much closer to learning how to do more organic things. And that was the weird thing with acting is you go along trying so hard to perform certain ways, to do certain characters, to find what the beats are and to make sure you colored the beats and you react and all of that. And then one day it finally clicks and all of a sudden you don't work very hard anymore. And it's that, and to me, it runs, what is the word I'm looking for? It's akin to like Zen Buddhism. And I'm not a Buddhist per se. I love a lot of what it is, but it's truly be here now, which is ironic because no one is ever in the moment. But to be a good actor, to play somebody who's usually not in the moment, you have to be in the moment. It's really funny. But when you are in the moment and you are just taking in and then honestly reacting to what you get, that's when good acting begins. And yes, there's all this technical stuff around it. You need that as the scaffolding. But then the actual acting is that being in the moment and just reacting. It's very simple. The simpler your acting is, the better your performance is. So that was kind of my beginning journey. Then I wanted to go out into the world of acting. And so then you just did lots of theater in LA. We used to have a thing called 99-seat theater. I don't think we have it anymore. The equity kind of screwed over local theater here. But then you could do lots of theater. Most of the theater in LA was showcase theater. You put on a play and then hope casting people come and see you. So the plays were horrible because everybody was just trying to like, look at me, look at all that I can do. And now I'm crying over my dead mother. And now I'm murdering the neighbors, and like all of that stuff. And it's like, we came to see a play. Anyway, I also wanted to get into improv. And so I was improv. I had an improv group. We were horrible. Then we became a comedy group and we wrote our stuff. We were a little better. Those were kind of the beginnings. And then I thought, well, now it's time to get an agent. And I was non-union at the time. So I went and got a non-union agent for like commercials and stuff, l'image talent, which is French for the image. Anyway, or image talent. Anyway, it's so stupid. Through them, she said, there's an audition for this 900 line, a commercial for it. And you guys don't know this, I'm assuming, but in the late 80s and early 90s, this new thing like just sprouted, which was these 900 lines. And there were 976 lines, and then there were 900 lines. And what they were, does anybody, I only see one face. Does anybody here remember this, by the way, the 900 lines, the 976 lines? Okay, good. I'm not alone. Well, what they were is, they started with, it could be anything. It was literally, it's like sports scores. You call it 976. You were charged $1.99 a minute to your sports scores. All sorts of stuff. I did one that was aimed at kids, which was really bad, which was for like spooky stories. Then they became more, then of course, porn goes in there and they go, hey, we can make money. And then it became synonymous with porn lines, which was, you would think of them as, now it would be cam. You have cam stuff. Anyway, back then it was like you got on the phone and you listened to some supposedly sexy woman talking to you. And that's how you made money. So I did a lot of these 976 commercials, 900 commercials as voiceover. And then I thought, well, maybe there's something to the voiceover thing. And it was just like one job led to another job. I became the voice of AT&T's Epcot ride in the early 90s as well. I got into Walla, which is, if somebody wants to know about that later, I'll go into it. That's a whole other story into itself, a whole other career into itself. So I did Walla for a while, and then I hooked up with a company that wanted me to do trailers for these really god-awful B movies. And the whole time I was doing these trailers, I'm like going, why am I not in this? The acting is horrible. I would be great in these. And now I am in those movies. So in the on camera, it was like, basically it was like work here or there. I'd get like 3 jobs a year, maybe 1 job a year, sometimes no job a year for on camera. It was very hard work, but the voiceover, I kept booking things here and there. And then around the time that I was 39, yes, we're talking about, I was 19 when I started. I was 39 when I stopped working a survival job, because I thought, I think I'm making enough money from voiceover that I cannot do anything else but focus on that. And then I also had heard from somebody else. They said, why you set up a home studio and you record for people, and then you can send it through the internets. And I'm like, oh, that's the whole thing. So in 2002, I just booked a CBS a promo gig. It was the daytime promo guy. I'll just tell the story. It was really silly. So I auditioned for this thing, and the way they auditioned for it was really stupid. Is they would let you sit. The next actor would be sitting in the studio listening to the previous actor auditioning in the booth. So you'd hear how they did, and you'd hear the direction. In this particular case, it worked in my favor because the campaign was hot enough for you. Okay, that sentence. Now think about that sentence, how you would normally say it. You'd be like, like it's hot out here. Yeah, hot enough for you. That's how you think of it. That's how everybody was auditioning. But this producer lady, really weird. She's like, no, no, no. We know it's hot enough for us. And he couldn't get it. I'm like, oh, I get it. It's stupid, but I get it. So I get into the booth and I'm like, what was this? She's like, Days of Our Lives, hot enough for you. Like, that's it. It was a simple tweak. And she's like, oh my God, it's amazing. So I got that campaign. And so with that money, I bought all my equipment and I started a home studio. And I learned, I learned how to code in HTML to make my own website. And then I learned Flash because I really like Flash for my website. And I learned, and at that time, it was really easy to beat the Google algorithm. So if you looked up voiceover on Google, it was #1 for a year. And it was that year that I ended up getting about, I'm going to say about 120 clients that were recurring. And so I was just literally like a window of time. And it was just a lot of times everything is luck. And this was luck. And I got all these recurring clients. And I never looked back. I've never had to go to a survival job. This pandemic has pushed me to the edge. But prior to this, I've never had to look back at going to get a survival job. And then on camera wise, talking about doing the art and like the business and the art. So the business was the voiceover. Like, I mean, I enjoy doing voiceover, but I want to act with my eyes. I want my whole body to be in there. I want to go back and then watch it and go look at me in that make-believe world, because that's, when I was a kid, that's what I loved about acting, and I wanted to be a part of that. And yes, there's the whole, theater of the mind with voiceover, but the majority of voiceover is not that. The majority of voiceovers are commercials or legal tags on banks, which are great. You go in, you work for 15 minutes, and then you get $400. So that's always cool. But but at one point, so like that's the money, but that's not feeding the soul. Feeding the soul is me, and I discovered this in where are we? I forget where I was time-wise. In the early teens, I could say that now. I started getting, because of my work as Wesker in Resident Evil, there were fans that also were producing their own indie films. And I ended up booking a film called Apocalypse Kiss, shot in Philadelphia. And they worked me under a SAG contract, which was great. So it was union. And but it was very low pay. And of course I got there and I'm like, you don't have to treat me like a star. They offered me 2 roles. One was the lead, who was a killer, a serial killer, and the other was a newscaster for one day. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be a newscaster, because that's what my agents would try to send me out for on camera because of my voice. They'd go, you've got such a good voice, newscaster voice. And I was shaved and short haired and all that. I was trying to be the product for LA, but I didn't want to do newscasters. My God, get a real newscaster for that. And so I said, no, I want to be the serial killer. So went out, I worked out for a year to get in shape for it, and because we had plenty of runtime for it. And then I got there and we shot, and I was able to rework the dialogue and the scenes that I was in, because that's the beauty of low budget too, is there's a lot of, so I'm in a low budget world, especially if they think that you're somebody, because for me, I was Wesker for them. You get to do the, not compromise, that's the bad word for this one, where you both work together. What's the word for that? I'm sorry, I haven't had coffee, but you know the word I'm talking about, when you worked it.
Collaborate.
So, thank you. I'm gonna need a lot of help. Please chime in whenever you want. Collaborate. So in that low budget world, all of a sudden you get to collaborate more. So I was rewriting these scenes, and it was a great experience. Now, at the end of the day, it is what it is. But my acting is good in it. I love doing it. And I mean, it just made me happy being part of that. And the money I made was barely enough to pay for maybe my phone bill or something. I have a big phone bill, or a couple phone bills then. All right. But that was about it. But even to this day, I mean, I look back at the work that I did, and I'm like, I'm pretty good in that thing. And they did really good too. They had a very low budget, and they did great special effects and all that. Apocalypse Kiss, you can find it online somewhere. And then I ended up getting another one, a murder thing in Houston, Texas. And I went there and I did that one. And again, collaboration. Then I got another one again in Houston. I went and did that again, collaboration. And I'm like, I'm having fun doing these films that pay me hardly anything. One of them I ended up went there for a whole month. So I set up my studio in the hotel room. And so I was still able to do voiceover that month. And then, so I did voiceover during the day and everything was night shoots. And then I'd shoot at night. It was so cool. I'd get home at like, 4 a.m. and I'd go into the pool, even though you weren't supposed to. It was like Houston in the summer. It was a great month. Anyway, so then I go through some life changes. And then I had, not a divorce. I was never married, but I had a house with somebody and we ended the relationship and sold the house. And all of a sudden now I'm over 50 and my work, I'm getting auditions for stupid things. I'm like just getting lawyer number one, politician guy on NCIS. And I mean, it's fun to work for a day, but those weren't feeding my soul. So talking about feeding your soul, my very first on-camera gig that was union was, I had 3 lines on a show called Coach, which was a sitcom on ABC, I think. And I remember I worked 3 days on it. And I remember I go, if I got one job a year like this for the rest of my life, I would be super happy. Oh my God. But that was such a lie. Or I didn't know it was a lie. It's just youthful exuberance, because now I'm like, sorry, I was almost swear. Like, screw that. I'm like, no, I want something juicy to sink my teeth. And of course, every 7 years we renew as people, right? Our cells renew, and of course our personalities renew. And so now here I am in my early 50s, or that time early 50s, and I'm like, I think I don't want to be on the treadmill anymore. So I told my agent called me up with an audition for Michael Cohen, to be Michael Cohen in a reenactment thing. I look nothing, even shaved and all that, I look nothing like Michael Cohen. And then I just told him, I'm like, no, I don't think I want to. And he was upset. He's like, not all of us have voiceover to survive, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, this relationship's over. So basically I left my agent, left my manager, went to an old friend who'd started a boutique agency. And I said, this is what I think I want. This is the beauty, by the way, of telling people what you want, not doing what you think you're supposed to do. And I said, I think what I want now is just to go out for these indie films. I mean, I'll do TV if it's a good role, but I don't want to go out for cop number one. I don't want to go out for the judge and the lawyer. And I want to keep I had a goatee at this point. I said, I'm going to keep my goatee. And she said, yeah, okay. She said, well, if you're going to do that, your hair is very actory. Why don't you let it grow a little bit? And all of a sudden, all I needed was this person who I hadn't talked to in years, give me permission to grow my hair. And because I had always wanted long hair, but I never did, because I thought LA wanted me to be, I came in '85, so I thought I was the Dr. Pepper guy, the cool vest and sort of suspenders and the short hair and hey, I'm the young, hip, skinny guy. And now I'm like the sort of overweight, middle-aged guy. And I'm like, I can freaking have long hair. And then what do you do with me? I don't know, but let's find out. So I grew my hair, started going on, we have a thing called Actors Access, which gives you a way to submit to certain indie projects that are, that the rest of the industry sees. And I started looking at roles and I'm like going, why can't he have long hair and a goatee? So I submit on that. So obviously I can't submit on cop number one anymore. I can't submit on, most of the doctors you can't necessarily submit on, or can you? It all depends. I found myself Googling, can a sheriff have long hair? Anyway, I started submitting these things and I booked 3 films in December and January. One of which is coming out May 21st. And I'm like, this is just the beginning of this new phase of my career. So it just goes to show you that, if you listen to yourself and more than you do others, as far as what you should be doing with your life, you'll be happier. I mean, I was prepared to do this and that nothing would happen with my career because not much was happening prior. And so that was kind of a cool thing. And I know I kind of strayed from voiceover. Sorry about that, guys. The voiceover stuff has been fairly consistent up until obviously the pandemic. That's changed our whole way that we do work now. So for video games and for looping anime and stuff like that. Also, we've had a cultural change. So my money usually was made doing commercials. Now they only want women or people of color doing commercial stuff where it's the narrations. Anyway, you know what I'm saying, and which is by the way, it needed to happen. Our industry has been so far behind on that, and and I've been the recipient, the beneficiary of that for at least 10 years, 15 years. So I don't get much of that work anymore, which is why I'm like, we're a little tight right now. But still getting the anime and the cartoon stuff and all of that. So yeah, so that's kind of like where I'm at, and that's kind of the difference between art, doing it for the art, and doing it for the money, right? And I get tired of listening to myself talk for too much. So maybe I'm really good at Q&As. I'll go on with my answers on Q&As. So how about I give it all back to you?
I have a question, or whenever. So how would you go about recommending people that are just starting out, students, in terms of, approaching agents or, marketing themselves, especially if they're, just starting out? Like, do you recommend a website maybe, like in terms of like marketing themselves and getting started? How would you recommend like the general college student to that is interested in getting started with voiceovers?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the first things is you got to really make sure that you think that you're ready. There's nothing wrong with, holding off on actually trying to get the work. In other words, if you, obviously I don't know your story, but I'm going to assuming that you've done a lot of theater, because you definitely want theater as a background. This is for on-camera work, is that right? Or for voiceover?
Voiceovers.
Oh, for voiceover. We don't need any more. Please go away. No, I'm kidding. No, no. For voiceover. By the way, for voiceover, I also really highly recommend taking acting classes. I also recommend taking singing classes, and I recommend taking improvisation classes. Get that stuff under your belt first. Then I recommend taking a voiceover class somewhere. And unfortunately, there's a lot of rip-off places out there. But there's also good ones. You just have, but it's easier to look for reviews as well these days. So assuming that you've done that, you've got like a nice base for that stuff, the acting, singing, the voiceover, because again, all of that's going to help you so much. Acting, singing, improvisation, then voiceover classes. After that, there's all this pressure on you to have a demo, and you're going to need to have a demo for the different genres, but that's only useful to get the agent. It's so rare after that anybody ever listens to your demos again. I just refreshed my demos after 11 years. So it just shows you how like nobody really cares at that point once you have the agent. If you, the best, so as far as marketing, a strict marketing question, then I'm a believer of having a website. They don't get you work, but it's just, might as well lock that up, right? If somebody is going to Google you, if they for some reason don't find you through your agent or somewhere else, at least they find you. And then your website then can turn them on to the other places. So you have to spend a lot of money on your website. In fact, it can be one of those, buy the URL, forward it to that. There's that one website that it's like My Links or whatever. I think it's free or it's really cheap. And you just list your links. You could list your agent and your IMDb page and all of that.
Oh, yeah. It's Linktree, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So you just literally do something like that, but buy the URL for your name and have it forward to that. That's the most basic if you're going to do a voiceover thing. Now, as far as the agent thing, it's always been, I'm really good at catching my swear words. It's always been difficult to find agents, especially the voiceover. So the best way to do that. Now, are you looking at trying to do voiceover in Los Angeles or New York or Atlanta or San Francisco? Or are you looking at doing it from San Bernardino and not leaving San Bernardino?
You mean in terms of like where I would be based on?
Where do you want to be career, right?
Well, I'm interested in Latin American audiences because I do in Spanish. So
where do you you're in San Bernardino now, but like let's say all of a sudden you have, once this pandemic's over, there are still studios that are going to be here. They're going to still want you to come in sometimes for the session. You won't be in your home studio. So now I see, I guess at San Bernardino, it's easier to still drive to Los Angeles, but are you willing to keep driving into LA, 3 times a week if you have to?
I actually live in 2 places, both in San Bernardino and Los Angeles. So I'm kind of in a little bit of an advantage. Usually I just go to LA place. Yeah.
Gotcha. So we'll assume that it's Los Angeles in what you're doing. All right. So, because there's a bit, you can have a career living in, I mean my swear words, in Bum Blank, Idaho. You can have a career there as well, but it's a different kind of career. But a Los Angeles career, a major metropolitan career, then it's if you know other actors that are going out commercially, ask them if they have a voiceover department, if they're willing to walk your link in or whatever, or forward an email to their agent for you. That's a big way of way people get agents. I know it sounds so stupid, but it's like when they say it's who you know, it is a who you know, but not like I know a really big, famous, powerful person. It's like who you know is in, you need to be integrated into the industry that you want to be part of. So you need to know other actors and other people that are, as you start doing jobs, you'll know producers and directors. Everybody's always looking for their next gig. And a lot of times the way they find it is through referrals of somebody else that they've worked with before or are friends with. But as far as the agent level goes, yes, you can do a cold emailing out to all the voiceover agents, and maybe you'll get lucky. I mean, I did that before we could get their email addresses. I did that in mail. I was sending my CD out to all of these agents. I did, I think, 4 mass mailings to agents. I never got an audition except for the last time I did it. And it was targeted at that point. I targeted to this few agents, and I was very weird in my cover letter because I thought I'm going to be very uniquely me. And I think I said, I'm sending you my demo reels. I don't think I've been in your office in a long time. You should see me. I've had my breast implants removed. It was something weird like that. And he loved it and brought me in. And that's how I got my first voiceover agent. Now, mind you, I got rejected by that agency 3 years earlier when I had sent to them. So where I called and I said, have you heard the reels? And they go, they're not interested, which means that it could have just been sitting on a pile and nobody ever listened to it. So you can do the cold emailing now. I think some places actually have a submission form, so you can go through that process. And that means that they are open to new talent. And that's good. You are very lucky in that I forget the proper terms now, but the Spanish speaking market is huge. And they're always looking for people to do that. Now, what I would say is starting out, while you're looking to get a union agent so that you can get more of those union gigs. And by the way, a side note, sadly, a lot of voiceover workers moving to non-union, unfortunately, but hopefully we can stem that tide. But while you're waiting, I hate these pay for sites, but there's a thing called Voice 123. It's the first thing you see when you Google, I'm sure. But I recommend it, just the basic minimum fee that they have. I recommend it as in to perfect sending in auditions and getting used to rejection, because it'll be very, very few gigs that you'll book through Voice 123. But I would recommend, because every day you'll be doing a couple auditions and it'll start to get you in that performance mode and to help chip away at how we feel when we get rejected repeatedly for months and months. That there's a psychology that you need to get to help you last long term in this business. I mean, I never got the career I wanted as an actor, but I'm still happy that I did it. I am where I am because I just didn't give up, and I had really, really lean years as well. I'm having a lean year right now as well. So actually, I do have a side job. I'm day trading. Let's hope that Tesla goes up next week. So,
I have a quick question if I can jump in too.
Oh, sure. I'll keep talking until someone shuts me up.
No. This is all really wonderful stuff. And I'm a musician, and so this concept of quote unquote making sure you're ready, and then also sticking out, like having this uniquely me, as you described, experience. I'm just wondering about prep work and building a portfolio. And earlier you mentioned mic technique. What was it? Word color, accents. I'm just curious to you in your practice. What do you do to practice? How do you practice? How often do you practice? What would the striving voice actor be practicing?
Oh, right. So, okay, good point. So yeah, I'm, because I audition and work so much these days, I don't really need to do that. But at the beginning, especially when you have these lean times where nothing is happening, and you say you can't afford to go and take a voiceover class with somebody, because Lord knows that it takes a lot of money. for all these classes and things, because everybody's just trying to get by. What you can do is you listen to, I don't know if you listen to TV before, but like this, we listen to commercials wherever they may be, on Pandora or whatever. But when you hear commercials and you listen to this voiceover, listen to when it's a good commercial. And can you tell what is a good commercial, what is a bad commercial, voiceover wise? And listen to the voice and what is it that they're doing? What's their style? We all know that those horrible, those horrible late night commercials that are usually locally done, and it's usually some old voiceover guy like me, but not quite like me, but who's talking, he's like, call now 1-900-555-1212 and you can also have this. Like, it's a horrible voiceover, but it's old fashioned as well. And so you can listen and you go, that's crappy. But then you can hear another commercial and it's a guy going, usually they have stars doing them now, but the Lexus 535, it's going to change your life. Something as simple as that, and you go, there's a big difference between those two. And you start to call it out so be aware when you're listening to commercials. Don't let them turn them into white noise. And that is a way of educating you as to what the market is wanting right now, voiceover wise, and what is not working, what's working and what's not working. And what is also, you start to go, hey, that's my realm. I'm in that I sound like that guy, or I can do that. And so you mimic them when you hear them. Another thing too is like, just grab copy. You can go online and find plenty of commercial copy and read out loud. Obviously, all voiceover people need to have a home setup now. And in fact, I would say, if you can do even a basic setup, your iPad, there's a thing called Twisted Wave, or I think some people use Audacity, and you get a cheap little $99, I know it's not cheap, but it's the cheaper side, $99 mic. Plug that in and start practicing that way. Record, because you have to now record and edit your stuff and then send an MP3 at the end of the day for your auditions, and all of that. But you should be doing that for your practice as well. Play it back. If you were at the place in your voiceover career, the beginning of your voiceover career, where you play back and you don't like the way your voice sounds, you're not ready to pursue a career yet. You have to love the way your voice sounds, know what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Then you're ready. Because again, just like I was saying for on camera, that you need to be able to self-direct, you have to self-direct for yourself as well, because all your auditions are self-directed these days. Even when the pandemic wasn't happening, most of my auditions I did at home. I mean, granted, I've got a full-on pro booth and all that, but everybody, even people like from their car on their iPhones, are sending in auditions, and they sound pretty good too because of the technology these days. But no one's directing you. It used to be that you go to your agent, sit in the waiting room, then go into the booth, and they'd have the booth operator, and he'd redirect you. A lot of times not the best way. And so literally, I mean, I got to the place where I'm like, I'm a better director of my voiceover than the guys in the booth there. The only reason he's a good director sometimes is because he's hearing what everybody's doing. And so he's helping he's helping you stand out different from the other people. And that's about the only, sorry, that's a tangent. I would say, get your home setup going, and start practicing on that. So like I said, you can open up a magazine and just read the copy on one of the ads. That's like finding commercial copy as well. Is it still available? Okay, on agents' websites, the way the voiceover community used to work is there was VoiceBank, and everybody used VoiceBank, and everybody was on VoiceBank. Not the case anymore, because a Canadian company went and bought it out and jacked up the prices, and all the agents in town said, screw that. And I'm doing well with my swearing. And so now it changed the industry completely. Now it's almost gotten old school, like the 70s. So it's all about what ad agencies use what agents and whatnot. Anyway, that was a side story history thing to say that it used to be you could go there and just go through all the agents and listen to all the voice actors. You can't do that. You can find some on there now, but you can go to actual agents' websites. You're going to go to like William Morris, go to the big places. William Morris still exists? I don't remember. Dean Pinero, that's my agent. He's awesome. And he's got like 100 clients there now. All our demos are on there. So you can go there and just start through and listen to all the different demos that are there. And you'll see what the industry is looking at, how people are marketing themselves, and the kind of copy they use, and their range. You'll see some people don't have much range at all, but they're really great at what they do. You'll see other people that their range is almost too much. You don't know what to do with them. I'm a little guilty of that on my commercial reel. And then animation, if you're getting into animation or whatnot. That I would highly recommend doing that. And that's the same thing with on-camera people, by the way, is you can find, where would you find those? You can, I think not all agents post their actors thing, demo reels, but you can also Google demo reels and find it. On-camera demo reels tend to be a lot worse. I used to edit demo reels for a living for about, I'm gonna say 10 years, 12 years. That was my last survival job. And so I got really good at editing them. So I'm very critical about on-camera demo reels. And funny enough, when I decided at one point, I'm like, I really should have an agent. This is ridiculous. I don't have a voiceover agent. I go, now I've got to go find a guy to edit my voiceover reels again because they're so old now. And I'm trying to think like, who do I want to go to? Because the last kid that I used unfortunately passed away. And I'm doing this while I'm sitting in front of my Avid editing system that I worked on. And all of a sudden I'm looking at the computer. I'm like, why just don't use video? Like, why did I not think of this all those years ago? And then I edited my own voiceover reels as well. And that's really, this is what I would say. You listen to all those reels, you can probably edit your own reel as well. And if you, because there's some really great people that can put a lot of production on it and all of that and make it sound like really great, but you're only doing it to get an agent. And if an agent knows you're new to the business, they're not going to expect that everything on your reel is actual legitimate stuff. They're not going to go, you don't have to fake them out with it. They just want to know what's your range. And they go, yeah. And especially the fact that you're bilingual, they're going to be like, fantastic, we definitely want you. So I think you've got a nice running start with that. And sadly, I only speak English. And now also know that when it comes to, and I'm branching off, so you shut me up if you want, but when it comes to voiceover, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of genres. You don't have to do all of them. Like I said, I'm not great at accents. So I get auditions for voiceover for video game characters that they go, it must be specifically, I don't know, northwest region of London or something like that. I mean, like, well, I want to swear so much. I'm a much funnier person when I swear. Anyway, but like I listen to that, I'm like, well, heck, I can't do that. So I'll pass on the audition. Now, but even more specific, there's cartoons. So there's doing cartoon characters. There's video game, and those characters are usually a little more cinematic. They're not as wacky as the cartoons. Though sometimes cartoons are cinematic now, and they just want regular sounding people. There's commercial work, so there's the announcers in commercials, and then there's the regular guy sounding, and then there's sometimes characters in commercials. Then there's narration. There is documentary narration, which is very, easy, stay back kind of thing. There's also corporate narration, which is where we need to understand more what we're talking about, especially when it's medical narration. A lot of work in narration, not fun, doesn't feed the soul, pays the bills. Then there's promo work, harder to get, pays pretty good if you can get it. But I'm a promo voice for Sony pick stations in India, in India. So I get work. I was sort of flashing my, I think I had a gig, I sent it in, okay. But the thing with promo work is you're constantly working, like as in you're on usually a retainer, and they're sending you stuff throughout the week and you don't know when you're going to get it. And they need it back within 24 hours, sometimes less, especially in LA. Sometimes they want it within hours. So just know that there is that high demand with the promo work. So anyway, as you see, there's a whole bunch of different areas that you can get work in. Know that there's a lot of work in narration alone. And I think starting out, that's a great thing to try to get more of, especially like the voice 1, 2, 3 I was saying and whatnot. Also, you don't have, because the union work is going to be in LA for you. Sometimes you'll get a union gig elsewhere. But there's a lot of non-union work that go, and now that you're non-union right now, take advantage of that and do as much non-union as you can. There are non-union agents everywhere. There's agents in Texas and Atlanta and all of that, and they have websites, and a lot of them have submission forms. And submit through them and become and get onto their roster, and the way that they work, it's not personal at all. It's like, oh, we got another voice. Oh, you're bilingual, great, you're in that category. And then every day you get auditions. Kind of like Voice 1, 2, 3, only you didn't pay to be a part of it. And then you send those auditions and you rarely hear from them because they're basically, it's like cattle call auditioning. They're 500 people sent in auditions. So maybe yours got heard, maybe it didn't. So you never take it personally. There are a lot of cards being sent to you and you scratch it off and send it back and maybe you won. The was something else I was going to say about that. Oh yeah, as far as an agent, so like I told you about Voice 123, and that you actually have to pay a fee to get those auditions. I'm not a fan of it. Don't need to do it, but I'm just giving a heads up about it. When it comes to when you're going for an agent, no agent should charge you anything. Some of them, the non-union ones, will take 20%, but they got to tell you that up front. The standard should be 10%, but just know that. No agent should say, yes, you can be in our roster, but it's going to cost you whatever money. It's like, screw that. Don't do that. There's plenty of agents out there, and you'll get the same result, which is you'll get a whole bunch of auditions because they're cattle calling everybody. So yeah. All righty. So there's that.
Thank you so much. These are wonderful, wonderful tips and guidelines. I'm going to hop on and just ask you another question here. You talked a lot, and I feel this too in every audition I take. Again, not actor, but music stuff. Hundreds of auditions, and oftentimes you get like 30 seconds to show them everything that you have.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it comes down to that direction that you mentioned. So my question to you is, how do we set ourselves up in order to take more direction, not just psychologically, but physically? Do we just take a bunch of auditions? Do we take a bunch of classes in order to be able to receive some kind of feedback loop, manipulate that, and do it differently? How do you suggest doing more of that?
I think, well, yeah, kind of what you're saying. There are two parts to it. The first is the psychology of it, which is the thing to remember is that when you get direction, they're not saying that what you're doing is bad, and it might be, but they're not saying that. They're saying, this is what I want. And you go into everything going, you're going to give me money to do this. I want to make sure you're really happy. It's basic customer service. You're the client, and I want you happy. What did you say you want? You want me to be more boomy? Now, if I know what boomy is, I'm going to do it. If I don't know, I'm going to ask. But I'm asking a nice way. I'm going to go, boomy. When you say boomy, do you mean blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah? And then they'll go, well, hopefully they'll go. Because sometimes you get a crappy director and you'll never figure out what the hell they want. I had a guy go on for literally 10 minutes on the way I was saying the word "the" in a radio commercial for disinfectant. And I'm like the? And at the end of it, I was so frustrated, but I think he was an idiot. So anyway, but that's the first thing, psychology. I want to please you. You're giving me money. I want to make sure you're as happy as possible. But now, how do you make sure that your instrument, and my talent of the way to manipulate my instrument, which is, this is your instrument, and this is as well. How do I make sure that I get good at doing that? So just like any athlete, it's you need to exercise, you need to practice, do your run. I don't know anything about sports, anyway, but something to that effect. So essentially, I pick up copy and I go, well, this copy, I wish I could. Oh my God, it's the age where you don't have magazines sitting around anymore. But I'm just trying to think if I had some kind of, here, this is give the world good energy. So here's the tagline, give the world good energy. So look at that and I go, this is like a happy thing for granola bars that we're selling. So give the world good energy. So that's what I'm thinking at first. And then I go, oh no, it's a mock commercial. We wanted more funny and mock. It's like, give the world good energy. I'm like, no, it's more like a promo. Give the world good energy. No, we wanted like more of a cartoon kind of, he's our mascot and he looks like this big puppy, but give the world good energy. It's whatever, you just keep practicing it in a whole bunch of different ways. And the more you can stretch yourself out all of those ways, the easier it is the next time you get a direction. So the farther out you go, the easier it is to give them just half of that. And they'll do that. They'll go, yeah, we want it just a little more boomy. Give the world good energy. Actually, these you can bring back 50%. Give the world good energy. Thank you. It's knowing your instrument and knowing what, take it back halfway, all of that stuff, all comes from you having already done it before. And so that's what I would recommend for that. That's where, by the way, the singing really helps. Singing classes, or if you can't take classes, sing at home constantly. Try to become a better singer just for fun, and it's good for your soul. Improvisation, because a lot of times when you'll get commercial stuff and you're playing the every guy thing, you want to do the copy as they've written it always, at least on the first take. But then sometimes you want to button it, give them a little extra thing at the very end for them to remember you by. And that's, if something funny comes to mind, then you do that. I often It's kind of tacky of me now because I've done it so much, but I'll like sometimes when I get these McDonald's or things, and they're like, it's a big mock announcer or it's a promo-y kind of announcer. At the end of it, it'll go rated Y for yummy. And I'll just throw that in. And sometimes that works and I'll go in and they'll like talk about how they laughed at that ad lib. So yeah, improvisation, singing, and acting classes, understanding how to flesh out characters. All of that stuff also helps you take direction because you'll be getting direction in those areas in so many different ways about your instrument.
I'm going to piggyback on that and say that San Bernardino Valley College, this is a shameless plug that we offer all 3 of those classes, improv classes, acting classes, and voice classes. So if anyone here is looking for feedback, looking for practice, and all of these things that
there's no shameless plug when
no shame.
There's no shameless plug here when the event name starts with San Bernardino Valley College.
Exactly.
And we also and shameless plug for the film program, we have a audio performance class. So so there's definitely opportunity for all students from anywhere to get the experience they need right here.
Oh,
so.
Is everybody here? Are they all students?
There's a few students. We've got Sam, who was talking to you, actually works for our department. He's a multimedia specialist and kind of
nice.
assists with equipment, but he is a voiceover extraordinaire, especially Spanish speaking. I hope he's still there.
Yes, Kim.
I should have put him on the spot and make him say something. And then there's a few students. Our dean is here, Letitia. So yeah, and then Saturday E up here. She works as a professional expert for careers. She's our career specialist just for our arts students. So film, art, music, and theater.
Oh, nice.
We brought somebody in to help just our students on that.
Well, for whoever who's watching this playback later on that's not here, if you're in San Bernardino, then this is what you do. This is, if you want to start somewhere, this is where you start. It's all covered at this place. I'm not here to promote them, really not. But if I had the opportunity and I was in a town and I could start somewhere, I would do it there. I started somewhere else, having huge student loans for years.
Yeah, I also started somewhere else and I still have huge student loans. So I get it. So totally.
And I just want to just say that I'm also a Valley College alum. So this is me giving back to my community in this form. But I do really value all of your feedback. I think I'm learning a lot. So it will help me prepare students for these future opportunities. So thank you.
Oh, great. Well, that's cool. Sorry about that. I have a car alarm thing in the background.
Somebody's at my door, so I'll be.
I've got another question, if you don't mind me hopping in here for a Q&A. So I think you mentioned the Eisner method, and then Lucas mentioned, is it Meisner? Is there Eisner and Meisner?
It's yeah.
It's Sanford Meisner. The person that taught me learned under that method.
Okay, cool. So to that end, are there other suggested methodologies that you want to throw out? I don't know if they pertain specifically to villain or monster roles or not, whatever.
Oh, I mean, hang on, let me just shut that door. That's really annoying. So 1 second here. 1 second. So the thing is I'm not great about like there's the Alexandra method. There's all these other like acting method things, but it's like they're long processes to go through. And I think when it comes to unless you're acting, you've got an acting class where they're taking you through those things. If you're going to do this on your own, it's more about, so for instance, villains and monsters. There's a lot of monstrous voices that are used in voiceover. Like, so for instance, I'd be doing Wesker, but then they also have me do a couple zombie sounds too. And so it's getting used to the physicality of doing monsters, because even though it's being recorded, the physicality helps the voice change as well. So it's just play. That's where I'm more Meisner. It's like, it's just be what if I was that thing, and I was shaped like this. How will I sound when I'm talking? So it's whatever, just play a lot in your free time. Because once you get into the studio, it moves a bit more quicker, and they can go, can you give me this or can you give me that? And there's always the nerves thing when you first get a gig. I was on a cartoon called Transformers Rescue Bots. It was a kid's show, but I was there with, in the cast was Lacey Chabert from Mean Girls, was LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow and Roots and Star Trek Generations, and and Mark Hamill was there every now and then because he had a recurring role in it. Tim Curry had a recurring role in it, so I was a little intimidated being there. And we'd be like, they'd come up to a role they hadn't cast yet, and they go, "Hey, DC, you just do that for right now." And it's like, now you've got to like immediately have an immediate character based off of the very little that you know. And it's got to be full. And otherwise they take it away from you. And they took that character away from me and they gave it to somebody else. So you've really just got to be prepared. I mean, they still loved me. They just like, you're better doing that voice than you are that voice. So, and I went a little off the reservation on that one. Sorry about that. And I'm sorry for using that phrase. I'm trying to get better at not using these old racist phrases. So.
I didn't hear it, but I'm not going to ask what it was. We have about 2 minutes. Lucas, did you want to, I don't know if we have any more questions.
I don't see any. I
do have one.
Go ahead, because I gotta go launch the next panel.
I just want to, just for our students and all of us to know, is how do you de-stress? What is your self-care?
I'm an alcoholic. No, here's the thing is, I'm doing what
right? Keep it real.
So if you're talking about like when you go into a session, when you're like nervous because you got that first big gig or whatever, the thing is the hard part's over. You got the job. So just go do what you do. You already know what you're doing. You don't have to prove yourself again. Don't think that way, at least. Just go in and do the job. And so you just breathe through it. And also this phrase, I'll leave you with this phrase, because this is what changed my life. Fake it until you make it. It's in all ways that your marketing, all of that. As long as you're being genuine as to who you are, fake it as in, I am now being the thing that I'm aspiring to be. I am that thing. You keep thinking that, do things that support that, and sooner or later, you become that. And before then, people start treating you that way, which makes it easier for you to become the thing that you're faking that you are. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Yes, totally.